Greetings, amazing educators. Melissa Lambert here, Fostering Quality Schools. This is Module 2, Who's Doing the Talking? Before we get started, did you participate in Module 1, Student Engagement? How did it go? Send us some love. This is a little video QR code, so take a little snap of that. It's going to send you right to the flipGrid, where I have a little brief introduction for you to think about sending us some feedback. We ask our students to do this all the time, so give us a little shout out. Let us know how Module 1 went, things that went well and things that didn't work so well. And we'll continue with this challenge around student engagement and thinking about the remote setting, particularly around the elementary remote setting, but certainly things that we can apply at the secondary as well. So how is it going? What are things that we can try and do differently to support student agency and student voice? So when we think about students and this framework and really building their voice and their things to talk about that really help them engage in learning, we're developing this notion of student agency. And behind that, it's not all about the students, right? We've got to think about what are agentive behaviors in students and how can we truly support that and model the way for ourselves and for other adults. Because sometimes when students do become agentive and they do get a sense of their own voice, adults can find that concerning, and sometimes they don't always value that process. So how do we model the way? How do we know when to let go and when to support this kind of student growth? So these are themes that are going to come up throughout the conversation today. And of course, just as a reminder, this is part 2 of a 3-part series. We're going to define and explore academic discourse. You have a reading that goes along with this, and you can hit, we're all QR folks here, so you can take a little snap of that QR code at the top of the screen, and that's going to send you right to the reading resource, particularly as we guide through today. You want to think about working individually through this at your own pace, but also who can you buddy up with? Who have you been working with? How can you use this as a conversation in your PLC? So you can watch this video, read the research and resource, and also collect evidence, try something new, and then look and work towards adjusting your instruction. So one of the things that we have been working around is student engagement. And when we think about student engagement, and particularly as we look towards student agency and developing student agency, let's think about a couple of different things that happen all the time. So you're in a class, you're online in a remote setting, you're in a virtual, you have part of your group is there and part of it's online, and students are talking. And you find yourself saying, students, can you please stop talking, right? And then you launch into the task and you ask a question about the task, and what happens? Silence, right? Maybe 1 or 2 students answer. So what's happening there, right? We want students to talk, but we want students to talk on our own terms. And it's counterintuitive to a certain extent. It sets up a dichotomy, and it really, it sends an interesting message. So really, when we think about the challenge, how do we get students talking, but how do we get them talking using academic language? We know language is power. We know that there are ways of using language that even at the early elementary levels can really inspire engagement and agency. So let's dive into that a little bit. First, we have to have something worthy of talking about. Sometimes when we get excited about certain topics, and we know because we've done hours and hours of planning around it, it doesn't relate or doesn't seem as exciting to our learners. So let's play around with this idea a little bit. So the goal is to increase the quantity and the quality of academic discourse for all learners, but particularly for multilingual learners and learners who are really working toward that goal of academic language in addition and building upon the language that they already know. Let's look at the balance of time here. So what percentage of time on average do you think students are driving the conversation in classroom learning? That could be online, that could be in hybrid experiences. It's in any learning situation. Do you think it's about 50% of the time? Are they driving the conversation about 60%, maybe 70%? If you said none of these, you are correct. And we have data showing all the way back to the 1960s that on a good day, students are typically driving about 20% of the conversation, which isn't really true in the hybrid and in the remote setting. It's actually less. And we have research that shows about 5% of the time talk is driven by multilingual learners. And of course, we know when you're learning a new language, that is just not enough. And given the context of the remote setting, we've been set back in this, but we can do better. So let's look at a couple of different ways that we might approach this. So first of all, why do we talk? Why do we talk? What is the root of conversation? What is the root of really getting to the heart of why we speak and communicate, right? So we know that there's been many, many years of social psychology devoted to this, and mainly we talk to develop connections, have conversations, ensure understanding, share ideas, solve problems. But listen to this. Several studies show that 2/3 of conversations revolve around social issues, and 70% of those conversations are about relationships and personal experiences. Sound familiar? Conversations with and about people, social norms, behaviors to formulate understanding and socially acceptable. What is socially acceptable in different situations? These are all norming kind of conversations where we're calibrating our beliefs, for example. So essentially, we talk to form bonds. And so why wouldn't kids want to talk all the time, right? It is learning. And it's our job as educators to broaden both the knowledge base, that's content and the language used, and validate the many ways of speaking. And that means adopting ways of teaching language that values language and the different ways of speaking, that value new ways and moving away from other ways that would, otherwise erase language, right? So let's pop into this linguistics mindset, okay? So this is a version of the register continuum, and you see most spoken like or everyday language on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, as you move across the continuum, you can start to see that information on this continuum is organized in a certain way. So let's look a little bit deeper into this. So in most spoken like concrete everyday, it's not enough to say formal versus informal, right? So these are but the most spoken like is the most familiar. Let's say that. And then as you move across the continuum, you start to see elements of both spoken and written language. Now we're getting more toward what we call academic or most written like abstract. It's also often impersonal and generalized. There's a lot of technical vocabulary, disciplinary language, and language that constitutes the text versus language that accompanies an action, what some of that research was talking about. So in this, we may know this, but this is sort of the discrete, or this kind of way of thinking about language and speaking is concealed. It's not something that learners, especially learners who are just getting into understanding English, and all learners who are learning academic English. And so we want to understand and practice this. And there's really fun ways that you can practice with Register. You can role play. You can have lots of fun ways of saying the same thing in different contexts. The point is, the way we talk in certain situations is dependent on that context. So the way that we talk when we're giving a formal speech in public is very different from the way that we talk, behave, and even our body language is when we're in a small gathering, right? And with peers and friends. So that's one example of how language is different across the continuum. And then, of course, we have to give students an opportunity to practice with Register. The most important notion about Register is that all language is valid, right? Any linguist you talk to will drive this point home, that all languages are equally valid and they do not assign value to any kind of language, variety, or dialect. And there's a little bit more about this in the paper in your reading resource, but that is a really important point to understand, because especially educators, right? Because everybody has a language, including sign language. There's spoken like everyday sign language, and there's formal sign language. So because everybody speaks a language and communicates with some kind of language, most everybody has an opinion, especially adults, right? Adults have major opinions about language. So these are things that we're going to have to be aware of, and really think about ways to look at our own biases around the way that everybody speaks. So it's not about losing or ending or eradicating language. It's about building upon the language that we have and valuing all types of language, including academic language, which we all strive to learn. So let's look at the next idea, and that is just a brief generalization around academic discourse. So academic discourse is both oral and written, and it's the exchange of ideas and knowledge. To be really high quality, these should be extended, even in the elementary, even in the early elementary, to have being able to really play with those ideas around new language and language that relates to the disciplines such as science, the language of mathematics, the language of history, including the analytical practices such as building arguments, having explanations, critiquing and building on one another's ideas, clarifying misconceptions, and communicating information, right? So that's what we're talking about with academic discourse. For the purposes of this module, we'll look specifically at capitalizing on those foundational skills and really building those skills to learn about new information through language and a progression toward academic writing, centering specifically on the receptive listening and productive speaking. So thinking particularly about landing there, and how here are some samples of what early elementary students can really work on, and what upper elementary students can do. What this process elicits for all is to provide opportunities to read, write, say, and hear language that varies in form and function. So you might be talking about the different ways that language can sound in different contexts, multimodal and multimedia, and that you have discussions and topics that are worthy of talking about. So let's give a concrete example. So one way to do this is to pull to pull back, right? To pull up and have examples of universal themes: power, change, love, structure, order, relationships. We have seen some amazing conversations in kinder and first grade and second grade around this, where learners can really explore their own world and how their own world relates to these big universal themes. We've given some discussion prompts here, some examples of essential questions. Notice that they're highly abstract and they relate to the one-word concepts, right? So they're not yes/no questions, right? And as culturally responsive teachers and leaders, what we want to aim most at is valuing lived experience and attaching to lived experience so that new information can be learned. So these universal themes are an entry point. They build an access toward literary themes and disciplinary themes to extend your enduring understandings and make deeper connections. What we're doing here is activating schema. And when we activate schema, learners have a better opportunity to increase comprehension with new information. So try this. There's a structured discourse activity in your reading that relates to universal themes and academic conversations. We really pull from Dr. Jeff Zwir's work on stronger and clearer each time. So how we can work in that remote setting, either in breakout groups or pair activities or scheduling with learners, to do some key work on sharing how an idea can build upon one another's, and your beliefs can change, and your beliefs can really evolve over time. So how do you do that and really think about what you thought originally, and then reflect deeply on how your belief may have changed after talking to somebody. And then, of course, we have lots of resources and effective evidence collecting guides for you. Make sure you have a little bit of time to collaborate with peers. This is how it really, how the work evolves. And then always make sure you're giving yourself time to reflect on your own process. That's really important as well. So next time in Module 3, goal setting, self and peer feedback, we'll dive into helping students set their own goals and really truly become agentive as scholars. Thank you so much.